This new little cutting that I got is called Hoya australis, and from the scientific name you might assume that this is from Australia, and your assumption would be correct, but it also extends its range into Fiji and other places also throughout Asia. Now, this is a little bit more of a succulent variety of Hoya australis. There's many different types of cultivated varieties of Hoya australis, and this particular one just happens to be a little bit more succulent. But generally, Hoya australis is something that would require a little bit more like 30 to 50% full sun, so a bit more pared back from sun. So this actually I have around 4 feet away from a northeast facing window. But I am thinking that this particular variety wouldn't mind actually being in a little bit more sun, but I haven't had it long enough in order to be able to kind of play around with it. Typically, when I get cuttings like this small, I like to get maybe 2 of them and then put them in kind of different places within my home. And I would be very curious if this could actually withstand a little bit more light. But I do see that it actually has some new growth here starting, so it actually might be pretty happy in kind of the diffuse conditions that I'm actually giving it. You could see that I have a little bit more of a barky, kind of perlite-y mix here. And again, this is something that I do for most of my Hoya because most Hoya are epiphytic and they don't require their roots being in water all the time. Like, say for instance, some ferns, because ferns like to be in a peatier mix and a little bit more wet. These don't like to be super soaked. And it's totally fine to water them thoroughly, but I would just say water them thoroughly if you have a well-draining mixture. And because this one is a little bit more of the succulent variety, then I would say that this one requires a little less water on its roots to begin with. As far as pests go, these particular plants, I hadn't had this long enough in order to be able to say like I got a pest on it, but it doesn't have a pest on it, gratefully. And I would think that mealybugs are something that would probably affect Hoya australis, but for this, case in point, I haven't had that kind of problem, and I think they're generally pretty resilient plants to have around in the home. This is a little bit more cold hardy. I would say not as cold hardy as Hoya carnosa, so it's not something that I would necessarily have in a drafty window. And again, that's why I kind of bring this up, because many of us are kind of growing these Hoyas in a little bit more of a northern hemisphere, and that means we get winters and chilly falls. And so I wouldn't necessarily be growing my Hoyas in certain windows, especially if they're drafty. As far as fertilizing goes, I generally fertilize my Hoyas with a gentle organic fertilizer on a bi-weekly basis. If you're doing something with the more synthetic route, I would say cut that synthetic fertilizer by half and do it more on a monthly basis. And I'd love to hear your experiences in kind of growing Hoya australis and the different cultivars, because again, this one I feel like is a little bit more succulent than some of my other Hoya australis. And I would love to hear from you what kind of light and conditions that you're growing them in.